Welcome back to Newsday. Joining me now is the new chair of the Electoral Matters Committee, David Coleman, a new chair of all of one day at this stage.
Indeed.
Now, can I first ask you, we have seen in caucus today, Labor has met and they are going to oppose these reforms. They point out three issues here, that 3.3 million voters voted for independent parties at the last election. That would exhaust this process. This will entrench 38 coalition seats, and that this process, Labor feels, is being rushed through. What do you say to that?
Well, look, I think in terms of the opinions of different individuals and parties, that's obviously a matter for them. In terms of the process, we had an extensive process on this a couple of years ago, which released a report into the Senate voting system, a unanimous report on the recommendations. The legislation's now been referred to my committee to have a look into that and report back to the Parliament by the 2nd of March, and that's the process we're working through, and that's what we'll do.
When you look at the changes here in the Senate, it is quite big changes, and there needs to be, I guess, a educative process for voters at the next election. So what do you propose? How do you tell voters that this is now the change? Is there going to be a big advertising blitz, for example?
Well, look, obviously if the Parliament did decide to make the change, then that's a matter for the Electoral Commission, and there would, of course, be information campaigns and so on from the Electoral Commission about the nature of the change, and that's as it should be. So there would be adequate time for people to be informed about any change.
What does this do about the informal vote? Because at the last election, I think there were around 500,000 informal votes. Does this change of legislation address that?
Well, look, the proposal is to have optional preferential voting above the line in the Senate, where people would be encouraged to number up to 6 boxes above the line, and that's the proposal that the committee will be looking at. And during that process, we'll obviously take advice and evidence from interested parties, and then form a view on the legislation.
But do you think this will solve that problem, though? There's a high number of informal votes, and really, what's the point of looking at electoral reform in the Senate if it doesn't address that issue?
Well, look, obviously people who are advocating change would point to a range of arguments in favour of change, but as I say, my focus is on the committee process over the next week. We've called for submissions, and people will no doubt put their views, and we'll be reporting back to the Parliament in due course.
No doubt they will put their views forward. You're also part of the House Economics Committee.
Yeah.
The tax debate has been quite messy over the last week. Do you feel the government has finally started to hone its message, or is there some work to do?
Well, look, I think the thing that's messy is Labor's negative gearing policy. This is, a very bad idea, Laura. What Labor's basically saying...
We don't have anything to compare it to at the moment because the government hasn't put its policy
Well, look, I don't think it's a race to say who is the first to put out a policy in a particular area. This is a contest of substance, and the policies must be assessed as they are released. And it's very, very important to understand Labor's negative gearing policy. Very important. Every existing home in Australia, and this is no exaggeration, will no longer, from 2017 onwards, be subject, investors will no longer be able to claim interest cost, no longer able to negatively gear. That means they're going to withdraw from the market for existing homes, but they constitute about 30% of all investment in existing homes.
Any negative gearing proposal, will the government's proposal be retrospective?
Well, look, we'll announce our plans in due course, Laura, but this is a very important point, that approximately 1 in 3 of the investors in residential real estate aren't going to be there anymore. Now, you don't have to be Milton Friedman or a PhD economist to say that's going to have a negative impact on prices. And if you look at ABS statistics, the vast majority of the wealth of Australian households is in real estate. And this is going to have a very significant negative impact on this most critical of assets.
And just finally, can I ask you about media laws? This has been blowing in the wind for quite some time. It looks like we might have finally come to a package, but it all depends on it getting through the House and the Senate. Is it possible?
Well, look, I certainly believe it should be passed, Laura. These media reforms are incredibly outdated. the 75% rule as it pertains to free-to-air broadcasters is frankly, it's been an anachronism for at least a decade. And with the advent of live streaming over the internet, you can get Channel 9 and 7 can go 100% of homes online.
Getting it through the House, you're not going to get the support of the crossbench now after these Senate reforms. They've made that pretty clear.
Well, look, I'm sure that the crossbenchers will consider each piece of legislation on its merits, which is what is there, obviously what they should do. The arguments here for change are extremely compelling. The arguments for the status quo are very thin on the ground, and this is legislation whose time has come.
David Coleman, thanks so much for your time on Newsday.
Thanks.